Darnell Pruitt was 37 years old, and for 9 years he had been the most underestimated man in the room. Every room, the conference rooms at the school board where his wife worked, the dinner tables of her colleagues, the holiday parties where she introduced him with the practiced warmth of someone presenting a pet project rather than a partner. He taught seventh grade mathematics at a Title I middle school in Memphis, Tennessee. He drove a 2014 Honda Accord with a sun-bleached hood and a backseat that smelled faintly of whiteboard markers and old gym shoes. He made $51,000 a year. He packed his lunch 4 days out of 5. When her colleagues asked what he did, she would say he was in education, then pivot quickly to something else. What his wife Camille did not know, what she had never thought to ask about, in 9 years of building her exit plan, was that Darnell had been paid $51,000 a year to teach math, for the same reason a chess grandmaster might spend a Tuesday afternoon playing checkers. He was capable of substantially more. He had simply chosen this particular life with both eyes open. She did not know about the account that held, as of the morning, Camille sat across from her attorney and confidently described her husband as a man with modest savings and no significant assets, a balance of $1.4 million, accumulated quietly over 14 years through a combination of discipline, inheritance, and a financial mind that his students would have called scary good if they had ever seen it operate at full power. She thought she was leaving a man with nothing. She was leaving a man who had been watching and documenting and waiting with the particular stillness of someone who had learned very early that the most dangerous thing you could be was invisible and prepared. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Darnell Pruitt grew up in the Orange Mound neighborhood of Memphis in a two-story house that had belonged to his grandmother Estelle before it belonged to his mother and before it was eventually his. Estelle Pruitt had been a numbers woman, not in the illegal sense, though the neighborhood had those too, but in the fundamental sense she saw the world in quantities and ratios and she trusted neither luck nor charm nor the goodwill of institutions. She had kept her savings in 3 separate accounts at 2 separate banks from 1971 until her death in 2009, a practice she had begun after watching her neighbor lose everything to a single bank failure decades earlier. She clipped dividend reports from the newspaper. She read the prospectus on every financial product she was ever offered. She was a woman who had finished 10th grade and understood compound interest better than most people with finance degrees. She used to sit with Darnell at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings and run him through what she called her lessons. She would say, "Darnell, money that talks gets spent. Money that stays quiet gets kept." He had kept it very quiet. He had a gift for mathematics that announced itself early. His 8th grade teacher had called his mother in to say she had never seen anything quite like it, that the boy solved problems sideways, that he found routes through equations that no curriculum had shown him. He went to the University of Memphis on a full academic scholarship, studied applied mathematics, graduated in 3 years, and then made a decision that confused everyone who knew him. He enrolled in the teaching program and came back to Orange Mound to teach at the same middle school he had attended. His mother asked him if he was sure. His advisor asked him if he had considered other options. His college roommate, who went on to work at a quantitative hedge fund in Chicago, called him once a year to say the offer was still open. He was sure. What none of them knew was that Darnell's teaching job was what he did with his mornings. What he did the rest of the time was manage, with meticulous and growing expertise, a private investment portfolio he had begun assembling at 19 with the $22,000 his grandmother had left him, and which had grown through 14 years of deliberate and largely invisible work into something that would have startled every person who had ever handed him a polite smile at one of Camille's work functions. He met Camille at a fundraiser for a literacy nonprofit in 2015. She was sharp and ambitious and worked in administration at the Memphis Shelby County School District, and she laughed at his jokes in a way that felt genuine. And she was beautiful, and she asked him twice what he thought about the school board's reading initiative, which meant she was actually listening. He fell for her the way a methodical man falls, slowly, completely, with full awareness of what he was doing. They married in June of 2016 at a ceremony his mother declared was more beautiful than she had expected, which was her way of saying she approved. He had not told Camille about the portfolio before the wedding. Not because he was hiding it exactly, but because it had not yet been the right conversation. He had told himself he would bring it up after they were settled. He kept waiting for the settled. What he noticed instead, in the second and third years of their marriage, was a change in the temperature of certain rooms, a coolness that entered when he arrived at her work events, the kind of coolness that looked like comfort if you didn't know the difference. A phone that developed new password protection around year 3 switched from a 4-digit code to a 12-digit one on a Tuesday with no explanation offered and none requested. A weekend trip to Nashville she took with a colleague named Brandon that she mentioned only after she returned, framed with the particular casualness of someone who had rehearsed the casualness. He noted these things the way a mathematician noted anomalies in a data set, without panic, without immediate conclusion, but with the precise attention of someone who understood that a single anomalous data point was noise and a pattern was something else entirely. His other accounts, the ones Judith Mays would later describe to a colleague as extraordinarily well structured, sat where they had always sat, in the trust Estelle had built and Darnell had tended, unknown to anyone in his current life except his mother and his grandmother's attorney. He had not hidden them in any dishonest sense. He had simply never introduced them to a conversation that had never thought to ask. The trust had no joint account, no beneficiary designation in Camille's name, no documentation trail that passed through any address they shared. It was, in the most technical and accurate sense, exactly what it appeared to be. His, entirely, predating her by 4 years. He had an old friend named Ray from Orange Mound, who put it plainly, watch what a person does when they think the door is closed. One Thursday in February, Darnell came home from a faculty meeting to find the house in Germantown, the house he had purchased outright in his name before they married. On the deed he had never thought to discuss in any detail. Smelled of a cologne he did not own. He did not mention it. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to his wife sleep and thought about data sets. 3 days later, he began paying closer attention. The first thing he found was a credit card statement on the kitchen counter that she had not fully slid under the mail pile, in the name of a joint account he had not been invited to open. The card had been issued in both their names. He had not signed any application. The balance was $11,400. The charges went back 14 months. He photographed the statement and slid it back under the mail pile at the same angle he had found it. His hands didn't shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved with the same deliberate calm that had defined every significant action of his adult life. Over the following 2 weeks, he assembled what any dispassionate observer would have called a complete picture. A second credit card in joint names, balance $11,400, charges including hotel stays in Nashville, New Orleans, and twice in Tunica. A name, Brandon Ash, that appeared across multiple charges when he cross-referenced hotel dates against her work calendar. Brandon Ash, he learned through 30 minutes of methodical online research, was a regional director at the district. He had a LinkedIn profile that listed an MBA from Ole Miss, a photo that showed a man who wore his collar open at professional events, and a comment history on one public social media account that included 3 interactions with his wife's profile over the previous year, all of them innocent enough individually that a person who was not looking would not have noticed them. Darnell was looking. He found, in the search history of the browser on the shared home computer, a series of real estate queries from 6 months prior. How to transfer property in a divorce, Tennessee marital property law, what constitutes a marital asset, how long does a divorce take, average divorce settlement teacher salary. She had searched these on a Wednesday afternoon while he was at school. She had not cleared the history. He photographed the screen and noted the dates. He found, in the filing cabinet in the home office, a folder labeled Finances in Camille's handwriting. Inside were printed bank statements for the joint checking account, a printout of their tax returns from the previous 2 years, and what appeared to be a handwritten list of his known assets, the Honda Accord, value noted, his teacher's pension, estimated future value noted, the joint checking account balance, and the house in Germantown. The list was thorough, careful, and completely wrong. It was the financial portrait of a man his wife had constructed in her mind, modest, bounded, containable. It was missing one column entirely. He opened a new note in an encrypted application on his phone. He titled it simply, "The record he made a single phone call." "I need an appointment," he said. "It's time." Judith Mays had been a family law attorney in Memphis for 32 years. Her office was on Union Avenue, and her reputation was the kind that arrived before she did. Not loud, not theatrical, but specific. People who had been in difficult situations and come out cleanly tended to say her name the way people said the name of a good surgeon, with quiet gratitude and no elaboration needed. Darnell had researched her 18 months ago when the data set first began looking like a pattern. He had made the appointment then and canceled it twice, hoping he was wrong. He was not wrong. He sat across from her on a Friday afternoon and placed a printed document on the desk. It was, she would later tell her associate, the most organized preliminary evidence packet she had seen from a non-attorney client in 30 years. She reviewed it for 25 minutes. Then she looked up. She said, "The house is in your name alone? Premarital purchase." He said it was. She said, "And these charges on the joint card? You never signed an application?" He said he had not. He had checked with the issuing bank. The application had been submitted online using his name, his social security number, and an address from a previous residence. Identity fraud was a separate matter, she would note, from the divorce itself, but it was not a minor one. She set down the papers and folded her hands. She said, "Mr. Pruitt, I want to ask you something before we proceed. Is there anything material about your financial situation that isn't reflected in these documents? Because Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, and anything undisclosed now becomes a problem later." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said he had a private investment account, maintained separately from all marital assets, predating the marriage by 4 years. She asked the balance. He told her Judith Mays had heard a great many things in 32 years of family law. She was not a woman who registered surprise visibly, but she set her pen down. She said, carefully, "And your wife is unaware of this account." He said she had never asked, he had never volunteered. It was registered in a trust his grandmother had established, which predated the marriage and to which Camille had never been named a beneficiary. Under Tennessee statute, properly documented, it was entirely separate property. Judith Mays looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Then what she filed is going to be a significant miscalculation." He said he was aware. She said, "I want you to understand, this isn't about punishing her. This is about making sure the record is correct." He said that was exactly right. The record had always been the thing. She gave him a referral to a forensic documents examiner named Charles Worthy, who operated a practice in Midtown and whose particular competence was in identifying fraudulent signatures and unauthorized credit applications. Mr. Worthy's preliminary report, produced 11 days later, confirmed that the joint credit card application bore Darnell's social security number and a digitally reproduced approximation of his signature that did not match any authenticated sample. The application had been submitted from an IP address registered to the district's administrative offices on a Tuesday afternoon. The total unauthorized charges, $11,400. The total exposure on the application itself, in terms of the credit line extended, $25,000. The legal term for what had been done to establish that account was identity fraud. The jurisdiction was Shelby County, Tennessee. That weekend, Darnell drove to his mother's house in Orange Mound. They sat on the back porch she had screened in herself, the one with the wooden glider his grandmother had brought over from the old house. He did not tell his mother everything. He told her enough. She listened without interrupting, holding her coffee with both hands, looking out over the yard. When he finished, She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your grandmother used to say, a person who bets against you before the cards are dealt doesn't know what deck you're holding." He said he remembered. She reached across and put her hand over his. She said, "You go in there and you be exactly who you are. Don't be angry. Don't perform. Just be exactly who you are." He drove back to Germantown that evening. He made dinner. He and Camille ate at the table together, and she asked about his week and told him about hers, and he was exactly who he was. And she could not read a single thing on his face. And the evening moved like any other evening, quiet and ordinary and completely deceptive on both sides. By Monday, Judith Mays had filed the counter petition. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday in April at a suite in a law office on Peabody Place. Camille arrived with her attorney, a man named Giles, and with the composed energy of a person who believed she had done her homework. She had. Her homework was just incomplete in one significant way. She had listed the marital assets in her petition with precision: the joint checking account, $8,200, the contents of their shared savings, $14,500, their two vehicles, half the value of the Germantown house as she had estimated it, and a share of Darnell's pension. She had retained a financial analyst. The analyst had been given access to exactly what Camille knew about, and he had run the numbers carefully. The numbers were accurate as far as they went. They did not go far enough. Darnell arrived with Judith Mays and a man named Gerald Odom, who was a CPA specializing in trust and estate accounting, and whose quiet, absolute authority at tables like this one was something Judith had relied on for 11 years. He carried a bound document and set it in front of his chair without opening it. Giles opened with the expected framing: a straightforward, equitable distribution matter, cooperative tone, hoping to reach resolution efficiently. Judith let him finish. Then she placed before Giles a copy of Charles Worthy's forensic documents report, the IP address log from the district's administrative network, and the original credit card application with its digitally reproduced signature. She placed before him the bank's authentication records. She placed before him a separate filing she had made that morning with the Shelby County District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit, which was not a threat or a negotiating position, but simply a matter of record. A record she was required as an officer of the court to note had been made. Giles looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Camille looked at Giles. Then Gerald Odom opened the bound document and slid a single page across the table. It was a one-page summary of the investment trust established by Estelle Pruitt in 1997. The addendum transferring management to Darnell Pruitt in 2009 upon her death, the account history reflecting 14 years of independent management, and the current balance. Camille looked at the page. Something shifted in her face. Not immediately, but the way a structure shifts when the load-bearing calculation has been wrong for a long time and the math finally catches up. She looked at the number. She looked at Darnell. He was watching her with the same expression he brought to everything: patient, clear, entirely composed. She said quietly, "You never told me," he said equally quietly, "you never asked." Her attorney put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. She said, 9 years, and you just sat there. He said, "I sat there and I was a husband. You sat there and you were planning. Those aren't the same thing." She tried something else then, not anger, but the register that had worked at other tables in other rooms, the appeal to shared history, to the early years, to what they had built together, to the fact that a marriage was a partnership and he had withheld something material, and that wasn't fair either. She was not wrong that it wasn't entirely simple. She was wrong about what it meant. His mother's older sister, Aunt Rosalind, who had arrived quietly 10 minutes before the session and sat in the corner at Judith's invitation, said only this: "Baby, you filed first. You filed on a man you thought had nothing because you thought that made it easy. It just made it honest." Camille had nothing left to say. Judith proceeded through the counter petition. Darnell stood when it was finished, straightened his jacket, the gray one he wore to parent-teacher conferences, the same one just pressed, and gathered his copies. He looked at Camille for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with anger, with a particular expression of a man who had loved someone completely and found out in full the terms on which that love had been returned. He said, "I hope you find what you were actually looking for." Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. He did not look back. 14 months later, Darnell Pruitt stood at the whiteboard in room 214 at Leicester Middle School and watched a girl named Amara work through a problem he had put on the board. A compound interest problem, dressed up as a story about a woman who planted money like seeds, and he watched the moment it clicked for her, the exact instant the abstraction became something real she could hold. She looked up at him and said, oh, it keeps growing even when you stop adding to it." He said, "That's the whole idea." The divorce had been finalized 7 months prior. The Germantown house had been retained by Darnell. The court had awarded it fully given the premarital purchase documentation, and Camille had relocated to an apartment in East Memphis. Brandon Ash had left the district in December, the circumstances of his departure noted in a brief administrative memo that cited a restructuring. He had taken a position with a consulting firm in a smaller market. Camille was working. She was managing. Her mother, Darnell, had heard through mutual acquaintances, had not fully forgiven her for how things had ended, not because of Darnell specifically, but because Rosalind had told the truth at that table, and certain truths, once spoken, could not be unmade. The identity fraud matter had been resolved through a civil agreement. The terms were sealed. Darnell registered all of it with the same detachment he applied to any closed account, relevant to the final record, no longer requiring attention. Darnell had, in the months since, done several things. He had refinished the floors of the Germantown house himself, a 2-weekend project that had left him pleasantly exhausted and satisfied in the way that only physical work with a clear result could do. He had established a small scholarship fund through a community foundation, 2 awards per year for Memphis students pursuing mathematics or finance, named quietly for his grandmother. He had, through Judith's referral, restructured the investment trust with appropriate estate planning documentation, a thing he should have done years earlier and had not gotten to. He had done all of it without particular urgency, in the methodical way he did everything. The woman who had been coming to watch his students' quarterly math presentations, she was a pediatric occupational therapist named Nadia who volunteered with the school's literacy program and who had arrived at his classroom door one afternoon with the wrong room number and stayed to watch 15 minutes of his lesson, and then said, when he came to the door, that she had never seen a teacher explain negative numbers that way before. He had asked what she meant. She had told him it was a specific and accurate observation. They had talked for 40 minutes in the hallway after school. She asked careful questions and sat with the answers before responding. He noticed that she was there now at his kitchen table, working through grant paperwork for the literacy program while he made dinner. The radio was on a jazz station she had found and he had adopted. The evening light came through the kitchen window he had reglazed last spring and caught the grain of the oak floors he had just refinished, warm and even, the color of something that had been properly taken care of for a long time and intended to last. On the counter sat his grandmother's Bible, the one with the margins full of her careful penciled notes, interest rates and account numbers, and small, sharp observations about the nature of people. He kept it in the kitchen because she had always said the kitchen was where a family's real business happened. He had cooked beside that Bible for 30 years. He intended to cook beside it for 30 more. He was free. He was solvent. He was, at last, in a room where the temperature was always exactly right. Money that stays quiet gets kept, his grandmother had told him all those Saturday mornings ago. He had kept it, and now, with everything that needed to be built still ahead of him, he was finally ready to let it speak. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.